Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast, the first podcast of 2023. I'm your host, Andy Musgrove, joined by Aaron Stokes. We come to you just hours before Newcastle take on Arsenal down in North London, a top of the table match, which few people would have predicted at the start of the season, both for Arsenal and Newcastle. We're very excited to see how Newcastle get on. It's going to be a big test of where they are this season and if they are real title challengers. Aaron, they dropped 2 points against Leeds. The reaction was kind of half and half, wasn't it? It was half of a reminder, I think, of we have to remember where Newcastle were this time last year, and to be sitting here disappointed that they didn't beat Leeds is kind of a reminder of how far they've come. At the same time, you know, you've got to be clinical. You've got to be beating these sides down the lower end of the table if you want to be a top four side. Where does your kind of thought lie a few days after that result against Leeds?
Look, I think frustration is obviously on a lot of people's minds. That Leeds at home, it's a big chance to keep up with the rest of the pack, especially given how results went for them elsewhere in the league. But I think it's sort of a bit of Newcastle being victims of their own success because they've taken 4 points from Leicester and Leeds, a good result from the two games. They've only lost once this season, and it's just a reminder that they aren't going to win every single game as much as Eddie Howe wants them to and the fan base wants them to. But I think we probably saw enough against Leeds to say that there's nothing concerning. We saw how Leeds sort of acted in the final stages of the game, which was a message pretty much that Newcastle are now one of the big teams that teams are just going to come and sort of try and park the bus against. So look, naturally it's a bit disappointed it's 2 points dropped. As I've mentioned, clubs around them dropping points was a big chance to sort of extend that gap to the teams in and around the top four. But I think on the whole you can't be too disappointed given that they've came back, they've had that emphatic Leicester win, and they still haven't been beaten against a good side.
I mean, they battered Leeds in many ways. Alan Shearer's words, he said Newcastle battered them, just wasn't their day. So it didn't ruin my New Year. Did it ruin your celebrations, Aaron?
No, it didn't at all. And I think, look back at last year, where they were, last January, or even when Eddie Howe came in, and look at where they are now. It's just night and day. So there's going to be little bumps along the road. I don't think, a draw against Leeds at home is the end of the world. I think if we'd been sat here and they'd been beaten 2-0 and they looked like they weren't going to create anything, I think then you can maybe, think what's gone on. But I think on the whole, it was a positive performance. They just couldn't find their shooting boots. And it's going to happen from time to time. It's going to happen when Callum Wilson hasn't started and he hasn't had that run of games under his belt. So, it didn't ruin my New Year's celebrations, that's for sure.
No, and we said before the Leicester game and the Leeds game that we'd take 4 points from those two games, and Newcastle have got 4 points. Now, I think if the results had happened the other way around, there wouldn't have been as much of a disappointment from some sections of the fan base. But as you say, it's kind of Newcastle being a victim of their own success because the standards have been set so high. But the important thing was not to lose. The important thing was to play well as well. Not, there's a difference from playing badly and maybe getting the point. I think I'd rather go in disappointed not to get the win rather than feeling lucky to get the point.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. If they'd grabbed a point at Leicester when everyone thought that momentum was going to be maybe stopped, and then they'd went and beat Leeds 3-0, I don't think we'd even be having this conversation. So, look, I don't want to pull out the Jurgen Klopp book of excuses, but the conditions weren't very good for Newcastle or both teams. You've got a team that really wanted to just shut up shop for the last half an hour of the game. It was a game where there was a bit of aggro. And as I say, on another day, they would have finished some of those chances that Chris Wood had and Longstaff had. But yeah, look, focus now goes on to Arsenal. If they can replicate that performance against Arsenal tonight with a bit more creativity in attack, I think they'll be fine.
John Robinson says I knew the Leeds game was going to be tough because they were very good against Manchester City. They were for the last 20 minutes. I mean, they should have at least got a second goal back in that performance. So, I don't think Newcastle went into the game expecting to walk over Leeds. But I do think many people expect them to get all 3 points. But you seem positive there, and you saw enough against Leeds from Newcastle to feel tonight isn't going to be a game, a cricket score, like it usually is down at the Emirates?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, Newcastle's track record against the big 6, 7 teams this season's been, pretty much spot on. They're going toe to toe with big teams. This is going to be a huge test, and as you've alluded to earlier, this is going to be a huge sort of marker as to how far they've come, how far they've still got to go. Everyone's talking about how it's the title race. I think tonight, if they lose at Arsenal, I think that's it for the title. Given that the gap would go to 12 points, but it's a huge test for them.
Can I just jump in there and just say the fact that you've actually uttered that sentence is mind blowing in itself. If they lose tonight, the title race is over. Just to be within the race, to be on the starting, or to be within the top three at this point is amazing. So that just blows. I think that'll blow everyone's mind watching and listening.
Well, exactly. I mean, as I said earlier, rewind 12 months ago before they'd signed Trippier and Bruno, and we were all worrying about, a season in the Championship and who was going to potentially replace how. It was, as I said, it's night and day. And usually you're thinking Arsenal at the Emirates, maybe not a cricket score, but, let's just take the defeat and move on. I don't want to have my Steve Bruce hat on there, but usually that's what you're thinking about. Whereas tonight, I think we all know they'll go and they'll attack. They won't just sit back. I think they'll give it a really, really good go. And I don't think many people watching or listening to this are really expecting a defeat. I think a lot of people are quite positive going into this game. Arsenal, of course, have been fantastic. They've been, probably them and Newcastle have been the two overachievers this season. But I think it'll be a really, really good close game between two teams who are really, really high on confidence.
We're going to be joined by Football London's Tom Canton in about 5 minutes or so he'll be able to provide more of an insight into Arsenal. But for all their brilliant form, they beat Brighton 4-2 in their last game. They'd still conceded 2 goals. They still looked vulnerable. I think Tony Pulis was the man on BBC 5 Live, and he said, if you can get in behind them, you're going to score goals. Newcastle have those players to get in behind Arsenal. It's just a case of being clinical when the chances come to you. Now, they had 16 shots on target against Leeds. I think it was 16 shots on goal. I think it was 6 on target. It's going to be less than that against Arsenal. They are a very well-drilled side. So you need to be super, super, super clinical against Arsenal. Do you think Callum Wilson's going to be back fit and leading the line for tonight, Aaron?
Look, I hope so. I think Chris Wood has been a lot better recently. I think he's been getting in the right positions, but I think Newcastle just look a different animal when Callum Wilson's on the pitch. I think, given that, we're hoping that he's over this illness now, I think you've got to throw him back in from the outset if he's anywhere near close to full fitness. And I think that's only really the change I'd make. I've seen a lot of people call him St. Maximum on Twitter, saying he should be brought back in, but I think that Joelinton has worked on the left. I think he offers Dan Burn a lot of cover. I think you're going to need that tonight with Saka. So I'd like to see Wilson back in from the start. I think we probably will see him back in from the start. And I think Newcastle have got a really good chance if he can, sort of hit the ground running again before, like he was before the World Cup. I think they've got a really good chance of getting something from the Emirates tonight.
Ross Neal says we can beat Arsenal. It will be hard, but we can. That's the difference nowadays. And I think you're right what you say there. And few people will be going into this game fearing it like the old days, even despite the fact Arsenal have won their past 11 games at home against Newcastle. That's a massive record to have. But Eddie Howe is there to upset the odds. He's there to beat the history books, isn't he? So I'm not looking at this game fearing it. Arsenal are favourites, but there's not much in it. And Newcastle can go down there, and we know they're going to give them a good game. And if they get beat 1-2-0, we know it won't be for the want of trying from Newcastle's part, because they will have given their all. They'll have a game plan. They'll stick to the game plan. And it might just be that on the night, Arsenal are just, get the look of the green, or the quality comes through. Hopefully it's the way around, and it's Newcastle's luck that's in, and it's Newcastle's quality that comes through.
I don't think anybody, whether it's us or the players or the fans travelling down there tonight, have got anything to fear. And I think, look at what they've done this season. They've nearly beaten the champions at St James's, scored 3 past them. They've went to Tottenham and won convincingly. They've beaten Chelsea. They've gone to Old Trafford and got a point. there's absolutely no reason to fear tonight being a cricket score. I think, yes, Arsenal are favourites, as you say. I think, they're on such a good run at the minute. They just seem to be able to, grind out wins as they did on Boxing Day, as they did against Brighton. I think as long as Newcastle are in the game for as long as they can be and they give it a good go, I think, you've got to praise them. So absolutely no fear tonight. And I think the players will be thinking they can go down there and get something.
And not a bad option as well to bring St Maximum off the bench with 20 minutes to go if Newcastle are still in the game, which we hope they will be, because at that time, tired legs, you throw him on, he will stretch the Arsenal's defence, and he could be the difference later on, that impact sub, because Eddie Howe doesn't change sides, does he, unless he's forced to. You got Sheffield Wednesday in the cup coming up, then you've got the Leicester game, but you can't see him making too many changes other than maybe Callum Wilson coming in for Chris Wood. Given the 2 points dropped against Leeds, the results of teams around Newcastle have actually worked out quite favourably, haven't they? Liverpool losing, Spurs losing, Chelsea drawing. Yes, Man United won, but the other three, and especially the Liverpool and Spurs results, looking from the outside in, they look like such damaging results. It seems, and I'll probably be proved wrong in a couple of weeks, but it seems, looking at it now, that those results are going to have an effect, throughout the club. It's much more than a defeat, it looks like, for Spurs and Liverpool.
One thing, isn't it just so much nicer worrying about what Tottenham and Liverpool are doing rather than this time last year and you're praying for Burnley to get beat? It's so refreshing actually wanting the big teams to lose. But yeah, I completely agree. I think two big boosts for Newcastle. I think Tottenham under Conte look like they're adrift. They're stuttering against teams they should be beating.
Liverpool, they don't look united. I mean, that's the key thing. When you look at Newcastle United, everyone is united from the top to the bottom. Newcastle lose. Eddie Howe's not blaming transfers. He's not blaming anyone else. He's looking at what his team didn't do well or where his team can improve. Spurs lose, and he's Conte is straight on about miracles and transfers, and essentially saying, we need more funding. It's going to take time. And I saw a lot of comments from some Spurs fans rather, saying he's right in one instance, but wouldn't it be nice if he could teach or train or coach these players that he's got, who are some very good players, in the same way Eddie Howe was done with Joe Linton, with players who look like they weren't top quality Premier League players. And here we are under Eddie Howe, just over a year, and some of these players have turned their careers right round. Miggy, Joe Linton, you know what I mean? Whereas Conte is not quite doing that. He doesn't seem to be saying the things that would inspire confidence within a camp.
No, he's not, and it was something that you actually wrote about the other week. How Howe would never even do what Rafa Benitez used to do, and that was sort of slyly throw players under the bus. You'd never get that ready Howe. I think you'd never get him doing what Conte doing, but I think you'd also never get him doing what Klopp is doing and saying, we can't compete financially. There's never any excuses with Eddie Howe. It's just he just focuses on what he can do with his squad, and he lets all the outside noise around him, other teams, just get on with it. And I think, he's a credit to the football club. And I think, whatever happens in the next couple of years, however high Newcastle get, however, it falls apart, whatever happens, I think he will go down as being in the same breath as Keegan and Robson. And I think he's already in that sort of mould for me at the minute. He's only been at the club 15, 16 months, but I think you already sort of speak about him in that breath because of how he presents himself to the media, to the fans, to the players. Even if you're not playing in that team, it must be such a fantastic dressing room to be a part. And we've seen that this season with Lascelles and Fraser and players, big hugs at full time, even if they haven't played. He's just created a fantastic atmosphere. And I think that is what the other clubs at the top, the likes of Liverpool and Tottenham and Chelsea, don't have at this moment in time.
How important was it for Newcastle to come into this game against Arsenal, looking at those results from the other sides? How big of a boost will it be knowing that Liverpool and Spurs lost, Chelsea drew? Because you would think the feeling within the squad would be a little less chirpy, shall we say, had those three teams all won and Newcastle were left needing really to get a win tonight to sustain a kind of a place in that top four.
Yeah, I think it gives them big confidence. I think they, for as long as they can keep this gap between sort of 6th and 7th, the more they're going to, feel a lot less pressure on their shoulders. Look, it's still a long way to go, and we know anything can change in the next couple of months. But if they can just keep grinding out these results, keeping the gap to 6th and 7th, as big as possible, they stand themselves in massive, massive opportunity to finish in the top 4.
Ross Neal says, well said. I think he's probably talking about you there, Aaron. He's bloody awesome as well, Eddie. So a big fan there, Ross says, of Eddie. We're going to welcome Tom in now. Tom Canton from Football London. He covers Arsenal home and away. So I will bring him into the studio. Here is Tom. Tom, thank you very much for popping on to the Everything is Black and White podcast. How are you keeping?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. All good. Glad to be on. Do you have a good New Year?
I did. Shame Newcastle couldn't pick up 3 points, but as me and Aaron were just discussing, it didn't spoil the festivities. We're hoping for a win tonight. We were speaking before, me and Tom, about the last time Tom came on and did a preview podcast, and he alluded that he was a little bit reluctant today because the last time he came on, Newcastle beat Arsenal. And I have to say, I'm looking very much forward to the same result tonight.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. I think that, there's actually a lot of similarities between that game and this one, because I do think that Newcastle come to the Emirates with an element of nothing to lose, in a sense, because you think back to last season where, the season was over for Newcastle at that point. They couldn't really go any higher, they couldn't really go any lower, and Arsenal went there with all the pressure, all the expectation, and really faltered. And, that pressure definitely got to them. And they just didn't put in a performance against a side that just played, had fun, enjoyed their game, and ultimately had a fantastic performance and won 2-0. And I now look at this game and I'm going, all of the expectation, all of the pressure is on Arsenal to maintain this run at the top of the Premier League. If they drop points, people are waiting for Arsenal to mess up, basically, at this point. People are waiting for them to do something wrong, to drop points, because we've only dropped points in 2 games so far this season. So I think there's a lot of similarities, and I think that does lean more towards Newcastle having, just being able to come and play the way they want to play and not be concerned by what Arsenal are doing. And they've got the confidence and the quality to do that as well.
What's the big difference from that Arsenal side that lost to Newcastle at the end of last season to the one that sits top of the table today?
The big one is Thomas Partey. He wasn't obviously there for that game, and Arsenal's win rate with Thomas Partey and the team is something like 90-something%. It's kind of mad. We are a significantly better side with him in the team, and he wasn't obviously there for that game. El Neni, I think, played that game. Obviously, we've brought in some other players. Jesus won't be there because he's still injured and recovering from that serious knee injury. And Nketiah has come in and will start like he started at St James's Park, but again, is kind of just come off the back of scoring 2 and 2 and looks good. Zinchenko is another addition as well at left back, who's been brilliant and kind of really taken forward this inverted left back role. And then you've got the front 3 outside of Nketiah, Martinelli and Saka, that I think have just, again, this season taken their game to another level, as has Martin Odegaard, who is arguably maybe the form player in the Premier League right now. He's been unbelievably good. Yeah,
Aaron, I mean, a lot of names mentioned there by Tom, which I guess they still put a bit of fright into Newcastle fans, but maybe not as much as they would have done last season because Newcastle are in a much better place themselves.
Yeah, look, I mean, you can't deny the quality they've got. I think, the way Arteta's got them playing, it's sort of ingrained in them now, isn't it? That every single game they're going to play this, fast-paced style of football that you sort of learned under Guardiola at Manchester City. Some fantastic talent. I mean, Partey's been fantastic, as Tom said. I think you look at Saka and Martinelli on each wing. I mean, Saka against Dan Burn tonight might be a messy one from a Newcastle point of view. There's just one thing that I want to ask you, Tom, and I don't mean any disrespect with this question at all.
Of course.
The Arsenal of old, you always thought that they were going to somehow throw it away. You always thought that after Christmas they'd always fall away. They were sort of known as the bottlers. Mikel Arteta has got the youngest squad in the league, but they just look like a different animal now. It looks like they aren't going to actually throw this one away. And is there a feeling around the club that this actually could be the year that you see it out?
I still think there's a feel of disbelief still. And I think if you spoke to most Arsenal fans, they'd be very reluctant to say that we can win the league at this point. I think maybe that's unfair. Maybe I think they could say we can win it this season because, of course, Man City are dropping points. It seems as though Liverpool aren't really that, what they are this season is very odd. And Chelsea as well. And Spurs are Spurs. Even Conte came out and said that the best they can expect is 4th ever, which was fantastic to hear, of course. But getting back to the topic at hand, it's obviously there, but I think there's a reluctance from fans to commit to saying that we are favourites at this point, even I'm looking across certain prediction algorithms and they're starting to put Arsenal now as favourites for the league title, which adds extra pressure. The young team aspect that you brought up, I think, is something that Arteta's obviously wanted. He wanted to change the age profile of the squad. And I think last season we kind of got that immaturity out of our system by dropping it and dropping the Champions League at that point. And I think now this season there is an added maturity. Those young players that we signed in 2021 or that were 23 and under are now moving towards their mid-20s. Ben White's 24, Tierney's 25, Ramsdale's 24, Odegaard's nearing 24, if not already as well. Martinelli's, turning 22 soon. Saka's been to 2 massive international tournaments as well, been playing as a regular for England. So there's a lot of maturity in what is on the surface an immature squad in terms of age. So yeah, I do think that aspect of Arsenal has been kind of taken out of things by Arteta in the recruitment.
We'll hear from Mikel Arteta now. Actually, I've got a clip of his press conference. He was speaking about Newcastle. So let me just find the video. I'll play it now.
How highly do you rate this Newcastle side?
A very good team. Again, really well coached. I think what Eddie's done in that short period of time, you look at the numbers, incredible. Big credit to him and the coaching staff. And then they have created, I believe, a momentum around the team that they play the same way against any opponent. So tomorrow or this evening we'll start to prepare that game, and it's going to be another big test. But we will play at home in front of our crowd, and looking forward to it.
If you win on Tuesday, you'll be 10 points clear for at least 48 hours. How difficult is it to stop the fans almost getting ahead of themselves now? There's such a huge gap at this stage of the season.
It's not about stopping anybody. It's about being realistic where we are, the way we are performing. Obviously, it's impressive, and we are really happy with that. But as well, set the bars and the objectives in the short term, and what we want to improve, and what is making us win that many football matches.
With a new year ahead of you, what do you dream of achieving with Arsenal in 2023?
To win against Newcastle. And then the next one, and then the next one. That's the dream, and obviously that all my loved ones and everybody around the club feels healthy and satisfied and enjoys life, which is beautiful.
Just a couple more, Adrian.
Mikel, you were talking about how the players reacted in the dressing room. what do you take when you see that mentality? When did your players start getting like that? And is there a couple of things? Does that show that, one, they're not getting carried away, and also that you've now got a squad that can maybe manage themselves as well a little bit as well?
Great. When I see those interactions as well, obviously I see enjoyment and I see joy and happiness, because they were really happy and excited after a big win for us. But as well, they are moderate, understanding that we still have a lot of things that we have to improve as a team.
And finally, Kaya?
Good results elsewhere today, obviously City and Newcastle dropping points in the early games. Were the players watching that, or are they just focused on what they're doing before the game?
I don't know, I'm not a lot in the dressing room with them, but everybody knew the results, that I guarantee you.
Okay, guys, thanks ever so much. Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year to everybody, guys. All the best, yeah?
I mean, the first thing that stands out there for me, Aaron, Tom, is the similarity between Eddie Howe and Mikel Arteta in many ways of always focusing just on the next game. Eddie Howe's had similar questions about what Newcastle United can achieve this season, but he's always focused just on the game that's coming up. He's not looking ahead at all, really. And the same there, Mikel Arteta has asked about, you could be 10 points clear, what have you, and he's just focusing solely on the next game, which of course is Newcastle United. Tom, would you say there's any other similarities you've noticed? I know you're looking from the outside in between Arteta and Eddie Howe. They're both very young managers, both still making their way really in the game. Any similarities you think that the two share, other than that kind of focus just on what's coming next?
Yeah, I think their individual coaching of players has been excellent. You look at the individual progression of players in both teams. You look at Joe Linton, for instance, at Newcastle. You look at Xhaka at Arsenal, both, playing in midfield and doing brilliant things. They've also gone down a route of trying to, bring in the players that they want, that they think they can that are really going to kind of move their teams on to that next level. Yourselves with Bruno Guimaraes, of course, and us with Gabriel Jesus and 2 Brazilians, ironically, and they're looking to kind of push that forwards to level up both squads. So yeah, no nonsense as well. Neither of them particularly like disharmony in the dressing room. They want to make sure that there's a unit, that all of the kind of the players are singing from the same hymn sheet. But yeah, I think both of them have also got, I suppose, the underestimated factor. I think a lot of people have underestimated both Howe and Arteta and what they're capable of. You think back to Howe's previous job at Bournemouth. Of course, it didn't go maybe the way that he wanted to. But I mean, getting Bournemouth up to that level in any sense was a huge achievement. Keeping them in the Premier League as long as he did was an even bigger one. So to then take on a job where he's given more resources and better players, we're seeing what he's capable of in the same sense with Arteta. When he first came in, he had to work with Unai Emery's squad, which wasn't the best. And there was a lot of fractured parts of that squad. He's moved on the disharmony and he's brought in the players he wants, and now they're seeing the benefits. So yeah, there's lots of actual parallels between the two coaches.
And just in terms of how Arsenal play, for those who don't watch Arsenal, well, many people watching this won't watch Arsenal as much as you do, Tom. So just give them a bit of insight into what they can expect tonight from the way Arsenal set up, the way they approach, or the way they will approach Newcastle tonight.
Well, the first thing that Newcastle need to watch out for is a quick start. Arsenal have started games very intensely. They try to get a goal in the first 10 minutes as much as they can. And I feel as though in this game in particular, if Arsenal can get an early goal and force Newcastle to be more expressive and come out more, it could open up those spaces for Arsenal on the counter as they showed against Brighton. Brighton conceding 4 at home is pretty unheard of, but it was the 2 goals at the start of both halves which opened up that game significantly and gave Arsenal such an edge so early on. The wide areas are obviously key. Saka and Gabriel Martinelli love to use those areas. They're supported by Xhaka and Ødegaard significantly. Eddie Nketiah isn't Jesus. He's not the same. But what he is good at is getting into the box in those key areas, by the 6-yard box in particular, and getting on the end of chances. They'll try and force shots at Nick Pope in this case, and they'll try and get rebounds off him as much as they can. On the right-hand side for Arsenal, Ben White's more disciplined, and the left-back in Zinchenko or Tierney, whoever starts in this game. And I think the best area for Newcastle, if they're going to get the most joy, will be probably your informed player in Almiron playing on that right-hand side, getting in behind Zinchenko if he starts, because it'll be on then Gabriel to cover a much larger area than both Saliba and White will be covering. So that's where it'll be.
Tom, you've mentioned a lot of players there. One you haven't mentioned is Martin Ødegaard. Now, a really, really sort of ballsy decision by Mikel Arteta to give him the captaincy at such a young age. He's proven to be a fantastic leader in this team, despite, not having too much experience. What has he been like for this Arsenal team in the last 6 months, and how much better can he actually get in the next few months?
In short, it's been quite a meteoric rise from him. When he arrived on loan in January 2021, he had injury issues at Real Madrid during that first 6 months, didn't really play too much. He'd spent the previous season on loan at Real Sociedad and done really, really well. And I think a lot of people were kind of expecting and looking back at that loan season as to what they might expect from him. He only got a couple of goals in that 6 months, but despite links to both James Maddison and Emi Buendia during that summer of 21, Arteta really wanted Ødegaard. They had to wait at the start of the summer. Real Madrid didn't want to sell, and then Ancelotti turned around at the end of the summer and said basically that there wasn't really a place for him, and so they were willing to let him go. And Arsenal got an amazing deal at around 34 million pounds for him. He has, over the last 2 seasons, now started to add more goals. He matched Bernardo Silva's goal output, I think, last season in the Premier League. And this season's already scored as many goals as he did last season in the Premier League. So he's looking at really stepping up the contributions. He shoots more. He's obviously playing some amazing passes. The pass to Martinelli is probably the assist of the season across the Premier League, in behind for Martinelli for that goal, for Arsenal's 4th goal on Saturday. He is the core of what Arteta expects with the vision, the passing, the pressing. He's not the most vocal. I spoke to him after the game at the Amex on Saturday, and he said to me that he speaks when he feels like he needs to speak. We've got other vocal leaders like Xhaka, for instance, like Ben White. Rob Holding on the bench is a big vocal part of the dressing room, even when he's not playing. And I think he kind of leads more by example than from a vocality sort of sense. But I think everyone looks to him as an example, and he certainly hasn't shied away from any of the opportunities that have fallen to him this season.
What's really refreshing, I think, for Newcastle fans watching and listening to this is that we come into this game, yes, concerned a little bit about the great players Arsenal have got, But the flip side is that Arsenal don't just have one or two Newcastle United players to worry about. You've mentioned Almiron there. You've just talked about Odegaard. I think people will see similarities with Bruno Guimaraes. Joe Linton is a force to be reckoned with, at the back. Newcastle have conceded the least goals in the Premier League. Nick Pope is in terrific form. Kieran Trippier, what a brilliant sign he's been. Is there anyone that you're particularly concerned about? I know you've mentioned Almiron there as the informed Newcastle player. Is he, do you think, top of the list that Arteta will be kind of looking at and saying to his squad, that's the person we need to keep quiet?
Well, you guys might know better than me. Are you expecting Wilson and Sir Maximan to start this game? Because they were on the bench, of course, for the Leeds match.
I think Wilson should be back in. We've just been having this discussion before you jumped on as to whether Maxi starts. And I think in a game of this magnitude, he probably needs Joe Linton over Maximin simply for the defensive aspect of it. But I think, Wilson being back in for Wood is probably the move he makes.
Yeah, I think obviously that lends itself to being the key threat. Wilson does well against Arsenal. He loves a goal against us. So that will be something that both Saliba and Gabriel, and Saliba, of course, wasn't playing in that last game that we faced against you. It'll be the first time that Saliba faces Newcastle. He's on 4 yellow cards, it's worth mentioning. So if he gets a 5th, he will miss the North London derby. So that might be something that comes into the game as well. I think that the key battle is going to be in midfield, and also whether you can exploit, as I mentioned earlier, our left back position and the space in behind there. You've got the Joe Willock narrative, of course, as well, coming back to Arsenal in a Newcastle side that is far more competitive than the last time he revisited the Emirates. So I think that those three in particular, when you look at Guimaraes, Willock and Joe Linton, I know he plays slightly off the left-hand side, and he did against Leeds, but still coming in centrally and being a key part of that progressive group. They're the three that I think will cause the biggest issue, servicing Wilson in particular and Almiron. So if Partey has a great game, I'm confident that we can kind of stifle that progression somewhat, and White is obviously going to need to be on it as well on that right-hand side. But it's such a tricky one to call. I think it sounds such a cliche, but obviously whoever gets the first goal is going to be crucial. If it's early in the game for Arsenal, that certainly suits. And I think the longer it stays 0-0, it suits Newcastle more. So it's going to be very difficult to kind of judge this one. But as I said when I first came on, from Newcastle's point of view, I don't think you have anything to lose. And I think that makes you very dangerous coming into this game.
I think it's a big game for Joe Linton. I've got a feeling Joe Linton will have a good game tonight. Very physical. You mentioned there the issue with the yellow cards. Kieran Trippier and Fabian Schär both on 4 as well. So it'd be interesting to see how they play tonight to try and avoid picking up a 5th yellow card each. Is it a little bit difficult, do you think, for Mikel Arteta and for Arsenal to work out what to expect from Newcastle in terms of, in previous years, it's been very, very clear. Newcastle will rock up. They will try and absorb the pressure, park the bus, and if they can break, they will do. But inevitably, it's always going to be an Arsenal win. Whereas this Newcastle United side, they don't let the opposition have a moment on the ball. They are straight in their faces. They're pressing them. They want to be competitive, and they've shown that against Spurs, against Man United, against Chelsea, that they don't fear anyone. And is it a little bit difficult for Arteta to work out the best game plan to keep Newcastle quiet?
Ironically, I don't think so, because Arteta, as we talked about with Eddie and Arteta focuses on us. He doesn't really necessarily focus on the opponent as much. He wants us to play our game. He wants us to do, and that's worked this season. The only times I've really seen him look at the opponent is when we played Liverpool at home and he started Tomiyasu at left back in a bit of a tactical kind of move. And some of us have even talked about maybe Tomiyasu coming in instead of Zinchenko to deal with Almiron as well. But I would be surprised if he does that tonight. But I do think he will just get us to focus on ourselves. He'll get us to go and start strong, as I say, play that intense style. If Newcastle press high, which I expect them to do, we've got so many players that are so quick with their feet and with their passing that we've done well in playing through a number of presses this season. Brighton was a really good example. The amount of times they pressed us high or then tried to hit us on the counter, the recoveries have been so good that often that opens up opportunities for us. So if there is a turnover of possession, we're often so good at getting the ball back once again so quickly, and then there's open spaces that the wide players in particular can exploit. So if, say, Trippier pushes too far up the pitch when you think you've got a counter-attack and we turn over, Martinelli might find himself having a very great time on our left-hand side, but it can be very much equal in the opposite direction with Almiron on your right-hand side. So it's, as I say, it's such an interesting fixture because there's so much that could happen. It could be a high scorer, it could be a very cagey low scorer. It's very difficult to predict how this one might flow.
And Tom, before you jumped on, me and Andrew were talking about, Newcastle's title race chances, which obviously sounds ridiculous to say given how far they've
Great
come
to
the
say,
last 5
though.
months.
You must be feeling amazing.
Fantastic to say, and I don't think I'll ever tire of saying it. But
yeah,
I said to Andrew, if Newcastle lose tonight, I think that is probably them out the race. I think a 12-point gap to Arsenal would probably be too big of a mountain to climb. Do you think if Arsenal win tonight, it's between yourselves and City, or are you still not letting yourself get sort of that far ahead of yourselves?
Yeah, I think that I've maintained that for Arsenal to win the league, they have to win one of the 2 games against City. That is, I just can't see how Arsenal win it if they lose both games to City. I know that Leicester ironically won the league in 2016, and the only team to beat them twice was us, and we finished second that season. So it's not necessarily nailed on that needs to happen, but I just feel as though that's the only way with this City side. With Newcastle, if you get a result at the Emirates tonight, as I say, anything's possible this season with how inconsistent Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, less so United because they are starting to pick up some form now, have been so far this season. I agree with you. I think if we win, probably does mean that Eddie Howe's kind of sight is very much on the top 4 solely. But if Arsenal win this game, I think that, it's just a case of for Arsenal and Arteta of the next one being the North London derby after this, being United after that, and then, of course, City at the beginning of February as well. So we are taking things step by step. We aren't trying to get carried away too much, even with a crazy season that it is. But yeah, it's enjoyable watching Newcastle where they are. It's scary watching Newcastle grow the way that they are, how rapid, because I don't think anyone expected it to be this quick and this reactive to the change that's gone on. And I think that if there are clubs that are worried about this most, it is going to be clubs like Spurs, Chelsea, United, and now Liverpool especially. And I think from an Arsenal point of view, it's good seeing where we are, not just obviously we're top right now, but because we are like Newcastle, I think ahead of schedule in this project that's going on right now between the 2 clubs. So yeah, I think for both teams, they're in 2 very good places in the context of the Premier League as is right now.
So Darren Lee says there he'll take a 1-1 draw tonight, and that's where we'll finish with you, Tom. What's your score prediction for tonight's game?
The optimist in me says I think it will be a good win, because I think if Arsenal play the way that they've done before and get an early goal, as I said earlier, that opens things up. If it doesn't, it could be, as Darren says there, a cagey 1-1. I'll stick with my optimism, go for a 2-0. But yeah, there's no point ruling you guys out, because I think you've been fantastic this season. I think you've got a great chance in every game you play. So yeah, it's going to be an intriguing one.
Yeah, it certainly is. We say thanks to Tom for popping on to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I hope you enjoy the game tonight, but not too much, because Newcastle definitely can get 3 points. Cheers,
Indeed.
as always, Tom, and we'll speak soon.
Pleasure. Best of luck for the rest of the season. Have a good one.
You too. Cheers. Bye-bye. Fascinating chat there. I mean, I just go back to the list of names that he mentioned, Aaron, and what stands out though from a Newcastle point of view is that although you applaud and you go, yeah, some fantastic players, I'm looking at Newcastle's list of players and going, well, actually, do you know what? Newcastle aren't too far behind. I'm excited to see how Joe Linton does tonight in that midfield battle. I'm excited to see how Bruno does and tries to control the game up against Odegaard. Can Nick Pope maintain another clean sheet? There's so many exciting players in that Newcastle United lineup, in that Newcastle United squad, that you don't, whatever fear you do have about these good Arsenal players, it's not as high as it has been in previous seasons.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Tom hit the nail on the head when he said it's a very intriguing clash tonight. I think, yes, Arsenal have got some fantastic players. You look at Saka and Martinelli on either flank, but actually, you can say that, well, Miggy's probably performed better than both of them this season in terms of form. I think you look at that midfield and you think, Bruno, maybe Jolit and Willock could probably go toe-to-toe with the likes of Xhaka and Partey. And then you've got two fantastic defenders who have both, sort of overachieved the season. So fascinating clash, especially when you add in sort of the similarity of the two managers and what it means at this stage of the season and what's at stake. I think it's going to be a fantastic game.
We've got Amber Cunner with us. Newcastle will win 2-1. I certainly hope so. What else have we got? We've got Lee training us in with the form of our defence. We have a great chance tonight. And I totally agree. I think that is so key because the defence has been a proper surprise package, actually. I don't think anyone expected the defence to be as tight and as strong and as together and as unified as it is, and the amount of clean sheets they're getting. And the arrival of Nick Pope caused a bit of a debate, and we will talk about Dubravka returning to the fold in a moment. But he's proved all the doubters wrong. And what's great about Nick Pope is that for large parts of a game, he's not needed. But when he is called upon, he's so quick to react. He's so switched on. And I tell you what, if we're looking at the players Newcastle have bought under this new ownership, for me, he is, I think, probably the bargain sign. £10 million. What? I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, look, I bet Martin Dubravka is looking on and thinking, I wish I'd had a defence that good when I was at Newcastle. The amount of shots he used to face when we're in a relegation battle, and as you say, Nick Pope, some games hardly has anything to do. I think, nobody can deny what a snip he's been at 10 million. It's sort of, you pinch yourself to think, how on earth did we get him for that amount of money? But yeah, look, a complete surprise package. I think if you rewind the start of the season and you said Dan Burner's going to be the out-and-out left-back, I think everyone would have probably laughed at you. I don't think anybody thought Fabian Schär was going to have this amount of improvement as he has. And I don't think anybody thought Sven Botman was going to hit the ground as quick as he has. I think we all knew, that there was an exciting talent there when we signed him, but I don't think anybody thought, he'd be sort of one of the first names on the team sheet after only 3 months. So they've proven this season that they can keep even the best attacks out. And I think tonight will be another big test as to, how good they've been. Hopefully they can keep this run of form going into the 2 cup games.
I'm just going to say it now, though. Fabian Schär is definitely picking up a yellow card. He's definitely getting that 5th yellow card, isn't he?
I mean, we all know Schär and how much he loves the cards. I wouldn't put it past him. Exactly.
So I think there could be a bit of needle there tonight as well. We saw against Leeds, and Schär, of course, was involved. I just think we've talked about very early on the season, Newcastle lacking that kind of nasty streak about them. But we saw against Leeds, and it was a bit of frustration, but we saw against Leeds that, they were standing up for themselves. We've seen it. Was it against Everton as well? They're starting to just develop that little bit of a nastiness about them, which all the top teams have got. And I think it might be needed tonight as well.
Yeah, I think Chelsea was the big game, wasn't it, before the World Cup?
Chelsea,
where we saw the sort of togetherness of the group and, that they would actually, go toe-to-toe with players. I think the likes of Dan Burn and Joe Linton have been key to that. I mean, Joe Linton is, he really likes to wind the opponents up. He doesn't mind, getting stuck in with a tackle. And I think they did need that nastiness. Yes, they were fantastic last season to pull away from the drop zone as they did. But now, you've got a team that, players don't like to face. And I think they'll need that tonight, given that, the type of players Arsenal got. Xhaka's very similar to Joe Linton in that regard. I think even Partey and Saliba and Gabriel, you're going to have, as you say, a bit of needle.
Martin Dubravka returns. It's going to be interesting to see how he gets back into the fold. It's reported that he was the one who asked to come back. Newcastle then put into motion the option to recall him from his loan spell at Manchester United. It's caused a bit of debate on social media. I mean, look, there's no doubting he's a top quality goalkeeper. I just think for some, the way his move to Old Trafford happened and then the quotes that came afterwards, some people aren't overly pleased he's back.
I think he's burned a lot of bridges with Newcastle supporters. The manner of his departure, as you say, the quotes that came out after, the fact he hasn't played and he's came back. Now it's just interesting to see what they do with him. That statement that club released on New Year's Day says that he's going to stay and, be part of the group. I'm not sure. I think there'll be a few Premier League teams thinking, you know, we can probably nab him on a cheap deal here before the end of January, because
Does
is he
it
gonna work?
show? We all know how important character is within this group, and the fact that he didn't want to stay at Newcastle and challenge Nick Pope. Now that's one thing. If you're going to move, if you're going to push through a move and you're going to go to a team where you're going to be number one or with a real chance of being number one, I can kind of go, okay, fair enough. But he went to Old Trafford knowing he's not going to be number one because David De Gea is not going to get moved on. He went to Old Trafford to be the first of his countrymen to play for Man United. He's been open and honest about that. To me, personally, that doesn't shout like brilliant character, because what you want is you want somebody who wants to battle week in and week out and try and knock that number one goalkeeper, you know, off well from between the sticks.
But I think that's why he's burned his bridges with Newcastle fans, because Pope came in and we all thought, right, there's going to be a big battle on here. We don't know who's going to be number one. We don't know who's going to choose. And it just looked as if he'd sort of given up before, you know, he even started. I remember Pope started I think it was either the friendly in Austria or one of the friendlies before the season started. And it was as if Dubravka thought, right, well, that's me done. I'm not going to get in. And I think that's why, you know, he isn't sort of received as well as he used to be. And look, it's a shame because Dubravka gave us a lot of good times. He saved us a lot of times. He should be remembered as this, you know, a fantastic servant in the club. And I fear that he's ruined that by, you know, jumping ship and now sort of coming back with his tail between his legs. Very interesting to see what Howe does with him now. It's very interesting to see whether he wants to sort of just, you know, sort of reintegrate in this group. It's clearly done, you know, a lot of wonders for Karius's confidence. Does Dubravka think I'll have 6 months here, arm around the shoulder of Howe, or does he say, look, okay, I want to go and I want to play? So very interested to see what they do. I think a lot of it depends on what they do with Karius and extending his contract, which ends this month. I think it depends on what they do with Caldalo. So it's going to be interesting to see in a couple of weeks' time how they've played the goalkeeper situation.
And one thing's for certain, you know, Martin Dubravka will arrive back in Newcastle United, and there'll be no grudges held or anything. Eddie Howe will give him a clean slate and go, right, if you want to be here, you come and prove yourself. If you want to be part of the squad, go and battle Nick Pope. And as long as his attitude's spot on, which, you know, hopefully it will be, there will be no issues there. Of course, he has been linked to Leicester. Danny Ward, the number one at the moment, not looking at a top quality Premier League goalkeeper. So it'll be interesting to see if that gossip becomes reality, especially with the James Maddison links as well. Elsewhere, Aaron, in the transfer window, sorry, it is open now. Did you feel that the lack of a clinical edge against Leeds United reaffirmed the belief that Newcastle need another striker? I tweeted that out. I've had that view for a long, long time. There were some people agreeing with me. I know you've come over to my side of thinking now. But some people said, well, Isak's coming back. Chris Wood just, you know, had an unfortunate game. Callum Wilson back fit. It's other areas of the pitch which are priority. People were talking about a midfielder who can control the game as well as find the back of the net. People were talking about a winger. People were talking maybe a defensive addition. Where for you does the priority lie? Because for me, it's still bringing a striker who can replace Callum Wilson like for like.
I think this striker debate will split opinion down the middle for the rest of the month, and that is because so many people are so, you know, excited to see Isak, and they think, you know, he'll solve all the problems. Others think that, well, he hasn't stayed fit all season. Wilson's obviously always on and off the treatment table, and Chris Wood, you know, some feel isn't good enough. So I don't think you're ever going to get a consensus on that debate this month. I think for me, the priority should still be, you know, a backup right back or a midfielder. I am starting to come around to the fact that maybe they do need another additional attacker brought in, and I think, you know, Leeds did sum that up. They didn't look as clinical as they have earlier in the season, but I think Shelvey's injury changes things. I think you probably do need another midfielder. I think if anything was to happen to Bruno or Willock or Joelin, I think you'd be looking a bit short in that area. And I think, as I've said all along, you know, the drum that I've been banging is, you know, if Trippier goes down, we'll all hold him a breath. So I think a young, impressionable right back to learn from Trippier, and I think a midfielder would be my two priorities in the next couple of weeks.
How big of a blow is Matt Targett's injury?
Yeah, it's a big blow. I mean, Targett, he'd hardly put a foot wrong before losing his place in the team. Very unlucky that Dan Burn just slotted into the role and the defence just went from strength to strength. So very frustrating for him. It's a blow for Newcastle in terms of their depth. It's a huge opportunity for Jamal Lewis or Paul Dummett, probably more so Lewis, to actually really try and now stay fit and grasp the opportunity to be second choice left back again. But yeah, for Targett personally, it's a big blow. I don't think they'll go in, for a replacement this window, but a big chance for some of those that have been struggling to get in the team behind Burn.
Reports in Spain suggested that Stephen Nixon, Newcastle's chief scout, was out watching Ivan Finesta, who's been linked. He's a right back, 19-year-old. He's been linked to several clubs, and I guess his age, he probably would fit the profile in many ways, Aaron, of the person who could come in and just learn from Kieran Trippier going forward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the type of deal they should be doing. Emil Kraft was fantastic when he had that stint in the team, but obviously that ACL injury has kept him out for a long, long time. Manquillo, I think it's time to say goodbye. I think a player like Fresneda or Harrison Ashby, who they were very, very keen on in the summer from West Ham, would be a deal that they could revisit. But I think it's crucial just to get a little bit more depth in that defence, especially on the right-hand side.
I'm just diving into some of the comments here. Ian CR65 says, very difficult game tonight. I'd go with the same team that played against Man City earlier in the season. Bring in St. Maximin and move Joelinton into the midfield for Longstaff. Thoughts on that one?
For me, no. I think Longstaff is crucial to that press, which they'll want to keep up against Newcastle. And look, it just goes back to what I said earlier in the episode. I just think with Saka and Ben White bombing down that right-hand side at Dan Burn all night, I think you probably need Joelinton in there just to offer a little bit more when Newcastle don't have the ball. And look, I don't think taking Longstaff out this team's a very good idea when he's been quite integral to what they've done over the last couple of months, and I think it would be quite unfair to see him dropped out tonight.
Jim Ross is another one who would like to see Maxi play tonight. Ross Neal asks for our thoughts on QL, who of course joins Newcastle permanently this month. Eddie Howe seemed to suggest that his belief was that the kid needs to go out on loan. Is there a chance that could change, do you think, given our belief Newcastle need a striker? If QL performs well in training, could he be thrown into the first team squad with a chance of being a backup to Callum Wilson should Callum Wilson pick up an injury or just need to come off the pitch after an hour or so?
I don't think so. I think unless there was sort of an injury to Wilson or another one of the attackers, I can't see QL staying at the club beyond January. I think it's the perfect opportunity to loan him out. There'll be plenty of suitors both in England and abroad wanting to take him on, and I think given he's only started a handful of games in Australia, probably isn't the plan to throw him straight in at the deep end in England. So I wouldn't be expecting him to stay this month.
I just want to talk about the transfer market in general. We know there's this belief that Newcastle have an endless stream of money, which just it isn't the case. There's financial fair play to deal with, and as strong as the season's been, the mantra still seems to be slow and steady. They're not just going to open the checkbook like Man City did all those years ago. You look at the transfer market now. Newcastle were told about this ceiling that all the other clubs have got, and they haven't got one. Jurgen Klopp referenced it. Jurgen Klopp goes out and signs the Dutch wonder kid Gakpo. Chelsea are on the verge of signing the Argentinian wonder kid Enzo Fernandez, who of course Newcastle were linked to. Are you sitting down, Aaron, for this? £112 million, and the kid has only played, I think, less than 80 first team.
108 games.
108 games. I mean, it is absolutely mind blowing, isn't it? And that it shows you the kind of money you need in this market to really make a dent. But I tell you what, it also sort of shows you just how frightened these teams in and around Newcastle are. That Newcastle are here, and they're not just going to disrupt the party; they're going to be throwing the next party for the next few seasons.
Yeah, look, Eddie Howe keeps banging the drum about FFP, which fans don't like to hear, but it is part of the modern game. They've spent a lot of money in the last 12 to 18 months. I think it's something that Howe really, really stressed in the summer, is that he didn't want to disrupt this dressing room. I can't see there being any, 250 grand a week wonder kids being brought in, in January when they've got such a cohesion there. And as you said, it's slow and steady. I think this time last year, they needed to bring in 5 or 6 to steer themselves away from the relegation zone. They don't probably need anywhere near as much now. I think 1 or 2 additions is probably, far more likely this window. But I mean, that Enzo Fernandez deal, one, it shows you, clubs are paying extortionate amounts for, gambles essentially, because Enzo Fernandez could become the next best thing. He could sort of fade into, obscurity. But I think it shows that Newcastle have got a long way to go before they're actually really beating teams like Arsenal to Bruno's every week, because there's no way on earth that Newcastle are ever going to rival Chelsea for 127 million or whatever it is. So, yeah, I think it'll be a season or 2 before we see Newcastle pulling out, world record deals again.
And they don't need marquee signings, I don't think. I think what they need players who've got the same character of the squad that's already here, because we've mentioned it in many, many episodes. I mentioned at the start of this episode, the unifying feeling amongst the squad, that is such an important asset, and to bring in a big name that could potentially disrupt it. I mean, reports in Spain have been shot down, haven't they, about Ronaldo having a release clause, and it was good to see the fan base going, no, because he's just going to come in and he just send a wave of negativity through the dressing room. I'm Ronaldo, I'm the big name. Newcastle United don't want that. Eddie Howe doesn't want that. He wants players who've got the right character to come in, fit straight in with his squad, and push Newcastle United forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think, they need depth more than marquee signings at this moment in time, which Howe will know. And as we said in the summer, he made it clear that even the likes of Jesse Lingard, would he have been too much of a disruptor? Probably not, but he's asking for bigger money than, a lot of the first team players at Newcastle United are on. And I think Howe made a big point of trying to keep that wage band as tight as it could. And it's worked wonders, because you see now how unified this group is, and as you say. So, I don't expect any sort of £100 million signings so far, or as of yet. But look, in the next couple of years, as Newcastle start to grow and they have, a lot more sponsorship money from Saudi Arabia, I think they could probably be, mixing it with the best of them.
Roger says Ronaldo wouldn't get through our ego net. Totally agree with that. Give me your score prediction then for tonight, Aaron.
I don't want to sit on the fence, but I'm really sorry I've got splinters, because I'm going to. So I'll go 1-1. I think it'll be a tight game. I think Newcastle need to weather that early storm, as Tom said, but I think they'll match them, and I think they'll come away from the Emirates with something.
2-1 Newcastle. I've gone. I've done it. 2-1 Newcastle. This is actually the 900th episode of the Everything is Black and White podcast.
Wow.
Quite a landmark.
It is.
900. I think I've probably done about 820 of them. So thank you, as always, to you guys for listening, watching, subscribing, leaving your comments and reviews. It's much appreciated, and we can't wait for the next 100 episodes to come for that magic 1,000 marker. Our live event is now sold out, so if you haven't got your ticket, sorry, but we're limited to 120 people. 120 people have snapped up those tickets. And also, thank you for following us throughout 2022. I totted up the numbers, and we had more than 1.1 million downloads. We don't know the numbers for other podcasters. It's just a privilege to be within a pool of such great competitors from other media organizations and fan channels as well. But we're very happy with that number. It's a lot to do with the takeover as well. 78% up on last year, Aaron.
I mean,
do we think the takeover had something to do with that? Or maybe your arrival, perhaps?
I was just about to say, I think more so than takeover, I think it was my introduction to the Everything's Black and White podcast back in March that really saw the spike. So
if Roger could send me that ego net through, I definitely could use it for Aaron there.
Are you saying I'm Ronaldo? I certainly don't get paid as enough as Ronaldo, but yeah.
Well, I've seen you play football on a Monday night, mate. You're definitely not Ronaldo. This has been the Everything is Black and White podcast. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in and listening. If you are watching live on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the podcast channel, please remember to like and follow the podcast. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, where we're bringing you all the latest Newcastle United news, including a dedicated transfer live blog and a live blog of tonight's game against Arsenal, where hopefully Newcastle can beat the Gunners and maintain their place not only in the top 4, but in a title race.